Inside a skull, nearly 2,000 years old, archaeologists found something that should not have been there. A tongue made of gold. It was thin as foil, cut into a small pointed shape, and placed carefully behind the teeth of a mummy in the town of Al-Bahnasa in Egypt. The real tongue had turned to dust centuries ago. Someone had replaced it on purpose, right before the burial was sealed. Diggers working through the sand near the Nile kept finding the same thing, skull after skull, each one holding a small flat piece of gold where a tongue used to be. Al-Bahnasa sits about 200 kilometers south of Cairo, on the west bank of the Nile. 2,000 years ago, the Greeks and Romans who lived there called it Oxyrhynchus, named after a sharp-nosed fish. Egypt was no longer ruled by pharaohs by then. Rome controlled it, and Greek families had settled there for centuries. But the old Egyptian gods were still worshipped. People still believed in Osiris, the god of the dead, and still built their burials the ancient way, wrapping bodies in linen and filling the tombs with charms. This mix of Roman rule and old Egyptian belief is exactly where the gold tongues come from. Picture the embalmer who did this work, a man we will call Panas, since names like his appear again and again in the real records dug up at Al-Bahnasa. Panas worked in a small mud brick room lit by oil lamps, the air thick with resin and natron salt. He was not a priest of the old royal temples. He was a local craftsman, paid in grain or coin by ordinary families. When a body was dry and wrapped, Panas would open the jaw one last time. He would slide in a strip of gold foil, cut by hand into the rough shape of a tongue, and press it into place before sealing the mouth shut for good. The reason comes from one of the oldest Egyptian beliefs about death. The dead were thought to travel to the Hall of Two Truths, where the god Osiris waited with a giant scale. On one side sat the dead person's heart. On the other sat a feather, the symbol of truth. If the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it tipped the scale, and the dead person did not pass through. Before that moment, the dead had to speak, answering questions and declaring their good deeds out loud. A gold tongue meant the voice would never fail. Gold does not rot or turn to dust the way flesh does. It was a voice built to outlast the body completely. The gold tongues were not the only surprise. In the same graves, archaeologists found gilded masks laid over the faces of the dead, and thin gold sandals shaped to fit over their feet, so they could walk into the next world. Some mummies wore small amulets shaped like scarab beetles or the eye of Horus tucked between the linen wraps. Others were buried with bronze coins, the kind used to pay for bread or wine in the markets of Roman Egypt. None of this pointed to a palace or a temple. These were the graves of a working river town, people who farmed, traded, and prayed, and spent what savings they had to send their dead off properly. For a long time, people pictured gold burial gifts as something only for pharaohs, kings buried in stone tombs stacked with treasure. Al-Bahnasa proved that wrong. These mummies were ordinary Egyptians living under Roman rule, buried in simple pits dug into the desert edge, not in grand chambers. Yet they still got a gold tongue, a small luxury that must have cost real money for a farming or trading family. That raises the real puzzle of this story. Archaeologists found the gold tongue in some graves at the site, but not in every one nearby. Some mummies from the same cemetery, buried around the same time, have nothing gold in their mouths at all. One explanation is simple money. Gold foil, even cut wafer thin, cost something. And maybe only families who could scrape together the price chose to add it. Under that idea, the tongue was less about deep belief and more like buying the best coffin you could afford, a small extra for peace of mind. Papyrus records from Oxyrhynchus, written in Greek, show people haggling over funeral costs, down to the last coin. If burial was already treated like a transaction, a gold tongue could have simply been the premium option, chosen by families who wanted to be sure their relative arrived in the afterlife with every advantage covered. But money cannot explain everything, and some archaeologists push back on that idea. A few of the mummies with gold tongues were buried with almost nothing else of value. No jewelry, no fine coffin, just plain linen and that one small piece of gold. That suggests the tongue itself mattered more than wealth ever did. Perhaps it depended on how a family felt about the old gods, or which priest they trusted, or a promise made at someone's deathbed. Nobody living today can ask Panas why he chose gold for one body and left another silent. The papyrus that survives talks about prices and goods, but rarely explains one family's private reasons. Think about it the way we treat a last voicemail from someone who has died. A recording some people cannot bring themselves to delete. It is not really about the money spent or the technology involved. It is about keeping a voice from disappearing completely. The people of Al-Bahnasa did not have phones or recordings, but they had gold, a material that does not fade, tarnish, or decay. Wrapping a small piece of it into a dead relative's mouth was their version of the same instinct. A way of saying that this person's voice still counts, still needs to be heard by someone, somewhere, even after the body itself has gone silent. Only a small section of the Al-Bahnasa cemetery has been dug up so far. Beneath the rest of the sand, there could be hundreds more burials, some with gold tongues, some without. And no one yet knows what decided who got one. Was it money, faith, love, or something else entirely lost with Panas and everyone like him? The papyrus scraps found nearby, so far, do not say. For now, the only certain fact sits in a museum drawer in Minya. A scrap of gold, shaped like a tongue, still catching the light exactly the way it was cut to do. 2,000 years after the mouth it was meant for went quiet. More forgotten history every week. Subscribe so it isn't lost twice.